As we enter the third section of the book of Joshua, it's time for Joshua to divide up the land to the 12 tribes of Israel. By way of review, in chapters 1 through 5, we see the people of Israel enter into the land that God had given them. In chapters 6 through 12, we see God give them the land through victorious battles. And starting in this session, in chapter 13, all the way through chapter 21, we see them inherit the land. All the land is divided among the tribes of Israel. Now, as chapter 13 begins, we see that 3 of the tribes, or I guess 2.5 tribes, have already received their land. In the days of Moses, the tribe of Reuben and the tribe of Gad and the tribe of Manasseh each received land outside of the Promised Land, just east of the Jordan River. Reuben and Gad received all of their tribal allotment, and half of Manasseh's tribe received their tribal allotment. So now it comes time for the other 9.5 tribes to receive their land. And it's in chapter 13, starting in the middle of verse 6, that we get this kind of review of these 2.5 tribes and the encouragement for the other 9.5 to receive their land. We start reading middle of verse 6. Be sure to allocate this land to Israel for an inheritance, as I have instructed you, and divide it as an inheritance among the 9 tribes and half of the tribe of Manasseh. The other half of Manasseh, the Reubenites and the Gadites, had received the inheritance that Moses had given them east of the Jordan, as he, the servant of the Lord, had assigned it to them. If you're wanting to read about it, you can read back in Numbers 32 through 34 and Deuteronomy 2 and 3. Those chapters detail how those 2.5 tribes received their allotment of land. But in the rest of chapter 13, we really just have a review of the land that was given to those 2.5 tribes east of the Jordan River. But interspersed and scattered throughout chapter 13, we have reminders that another tribe doesn't actually receive any land at all. And that tribe is the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi doesn't receive a tribal allotment. They don't receive any inheritance. We're reminded of this in verse 14, and then at the end of the chapter, in verse 33. Take a look with me at verse 33. But to the tribe of Levi, Moses had given no inheritance. The Lord, the God of Israel, is their inheritance, as he promised them. You may look at a verse like that and wonder, why, of all the tribes of Israel, does one tribe, the tribe of Levi, not get its own territory? I mean, the tribe of Levi, that's who has all the priests. So why do they not get their own tribal allotment? Well, technically, they do get some cities. In our next session, we'll see that they get 48 cities that are kind of scattered throughout all the other tribal territories. But they don't get their own territory with boundaries. Why is that? Well, because the tribe of Levi was meant to be a representative of all the people. And all the people are supposed to not depend on their tribe or their territory, but on God. And so Levi serves as a reminder to all the people of Israel that they don't depend on their tribal allotment, they don't depend on their territory, they depend on God. And so Levi doesn't receive its own tribal allotment. And then in the chapters that follow, we see some of the 9.5 tribes receive their tribal allotment. The first is the tribe of Judah. Judah is led by an elderly Caleb, who comes to Joshua and requests some land. This is the first of what scholars call land grant narratives in these inheritance chapters. We'll see several of these in our time in this session. Caleb is the first land grant narrative. He comes to Joshua representing the people of Judah in chapter 14, starting in verse 6. Now the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the son of God, or the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me." Now there's a little bit of discussion and debate about Caleb's lineage. He's referred to as a Kenizzite, or his dad is at least. Most scholars believe that that's a non-Israelite. We don't know exactly when, but it seems that at some point in Caleb's ancestry that his lineage was kind of incorporated into the people of Judah. Maybe his dad married a woman from the tribe of Judah. Or maybe sometime earlier in his family tree, he was kind of incorporated into the people of Judah. We're not sure. I guess if we got access to his family tree through Ancestry.com or we got his 23andMe results, we'd be able to find out exactly when Caleb was incorporated into the people of Judah. But he comes to Joshua and he makes a land grant request. He asks for some land that God had promised in the days of Moses. Take a look at verses 7 through 9. He says, I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites, who went up with me, made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. You saw it twice in those verses. Caleb is referred to as a man who followed the Lord his God wholeheartedly. In Caleb's story, we see evidence that godly courage is linked with true commitment, that true courage and true commitment go hand in hand. In Caleb's life, we see that a courageous heart lives a devoted life. He was fully devoted to God, even when that devotion didn't make a lot of sense. What Caleb does here is he rewinds the documentary of his life to when he was 40 years old. He reminds Joshua of a story that they lived together. When Caleb was 40 years old, Moses gathered up 12 representatives, one from each tribe, and they were to go and spy out the promised land and bring back a report. Caleb is chosen, as is Joshua. We talked about this in our session on Joshua chapter 2. It's recorded in Numbers 13 and 14. 10 of the representatives, they give a negative report. This is a bad idea. We shouldn't try to take this land. But Caleb speaks up and says, nah, we can take them. God said so. And only Joshua and Caleb trust God. Caleb was devoted to the Lord with all of his heart. He demonstrates what a courageous heart that lives a devoted life looks like. And he reminds Joshua of that account. And in those days, how Moses promised that because of his wholehearted devotion, he would receive a plot of land. And he appeals to that promise. And in the rest of the story, we see what it looks like to have a courageous heart that lives a devoted life. In fact, we see two characteristics of a courageous heart that lives a devoted life. Characteristic number one is the characteristic of patience. A courageous heart that lives a devoted life is willing to wait on God and on God's timing. That's what Caleb does in verse 10. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years. Since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. He's been waiting for 45 years. God, through Moses, made this promise. He's going to give you this plot of land. But then they wander for about 40 years. And for the last 5 to 7 years, they've been fighting battle after battle within the land. And so here they are, 45 years later. And he's been waiting, because a courageous heart that lives a devoted life is willing to wait on God's timing. It's patient. The second characteristic of a courageous heart that lives a devoted life is one that takes initiative. It takes charge. Now, I know that might sound like it contradicts what I just said. How can a courageous heart that lives a devoted life be both patient and take initiative? Well, sometimes godly courage calls us to wait. But sometimes the waiting is over and it's time to act. And that's what Caleb sensed in this moment. It was time to take initiative, time to take charge. In verse 11 and 12, he says, I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said." You gotta love Caleb. He's 85 years old, and he's convinced that he is as strong as an 85-year-old as he was when he was 40. He's looking around and he's saying, "Hey, you guys want to see me do some one-handed push-ups? Count how many pull-ups I can do." He tells Joshua, "You know what, just go ahead and give me the land of the Anakites." Do you know who the Anakites are? The Anakites are the giants who terrified the other 10 spies 45 years ago when they went to spy out the land. Caleb is saying, I'm going to do what we should have done a long time ago. Maybe I've lost a step, but I haven't lost any fight in here. Caleb demonstrates godly courage, the kind of godly courage that says, you know what, it's time to act, it's time to take initiative, time to take charge. And so Joshua gives him the land that he requests. He gives him the city of Hebron, one of the giant cities. And then we get to chapter 15. And the rest of Caleb's tribe, the tribe of Judah, they receive their land. The chapter begins with kind of the territorial boundaries. The chapter ends with a list of city names within those boundaries. But sandwiched in between them is a second land grant narrative that belongs to Caleb and his family. Caleb's daughter, she demonstrates the same kind of courageous initiative that we saw from her father. In the middle of verse 18, so chapter 15, middle of verse 18, here's what we read. When she, that's Caleb's daughter, got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What can I do for you?" She replied, "Do me a special favor. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water." So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. Caleb had already given her some land, and now she requests some water, some springs to go along with it. She takes a courageous initiative, and her dad responds. Just like her dad, she demonstrates courageous initiative. And that's the tribe of Judah. When we get to chapters 16 and 17, the focus turns toward the tribes of Joseph. You may recall Joseph, one of Jacob's 12 sons. His tribe was split into two tribes. One of them we've already met, the tribe of Manasseh. The other one we meet in chapter 16. That's the tribe of Ephraim. We see Ephraim and Manasseh receive their tribal allotment. We get an overview at the beginning of chapter 16. Take a look with me at chapter 16, verse 4. So Manasseh and Ephraim, the descendants of Joseph, received their inheritance. Notice the birth order. Manasseh, Ephraim. Manasseh was the older brother. Ephraim was the younger brother. But if we were to go back to Genesis chapter 48, we would see their grandfather, Jacob, Joseph's father. When he is blessing his sons and grandsons, he blesses Ephraim, the second-born, with the blessing of the firstborn. And so even though they're mentioned here by birth order, when they're given their inheritance, it's Ephraim, the second-born, who gets their inherited land first. And that's what we see in the rest of chapter 16. But it seems that Ephraim only has partial success. They don't fully take in the inherited land. Take a look with me at chapter 16, verse 10. They did not dislodge the Canaanites living in Gezer. To this day, the Canaanites live among the people of Ephraim, but are required to do forced labor. For some reason, the Ephraimites, they don't successfully drive out all the Canaanites from Gezer. They have partial success. Either they couldn't or they didn't. And then we get to chapter 17, and we get the rest of Manasseh. Now, as I mentioned earlier, half of the tribe of Manasseh has already received their allotment of land east of the Jordan River. The other half receives it here. And that includes the daughters of a man named Zelophehad. This is the third land grant narrative in these chapters. Chapter 17, verse 4 says, They, that's the daughters of Zelophehad, went to Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the leaders and said, The Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance among our relatives. So Joshua gave them an inheritance, along with the brothers of their father, according to the Lord's command. Did you see it? They say the Lord commanded that we receive an inheritance among our relatives. So Joshua gave them according to the Lord's command. They're appealing back to a promise that God had made a long time ago, that they would not be excluded. They would receive inherited land just like everyone else. And so they remind Joshua and the other leaders of that promise. But it seems like the rest of the tribe of Manasseh isn't quite as successful as the daughters of Zelophehad. Because just like the tribe of Ephraim, they too have partial success in driving out the Canaanites. Take a look at verse 12 and 13. Yet the Manassites were not able to occupy these towns, for the Canaanites were determined to live in that region. However, when the Israelites grew stronger, they subjected the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not drive them out completely. The tribe of Manasseh is given fertile land. It's some of the most fertile land in all of Israel. It's also rich in trade, which might explain why the Canaanites didn't give up without a fight. But eventually, the people of Manasseh were strong enough they could have driven out the Canaanites. Notice how those verses ended. They didn't. Even though they could have driven them out, they decided instead, you know what, it's more beneficial for us, more profitable for us, if we turn them into servants, if we use them for forced labor. So that's what we're going to do instead. We're going to disobey God, recognizing that, yeah, we might get corrupted by their culture, by their lifestyle, but small price to pay for an easier life. And so they decide to just make them forced labor. They disobey God in the process. And that's Ephraim and Manasseh, the two sons of Joseph. They've received their tribal allotments, and they begin looking around. They breathe in the fresh air. They begin counting up all the square miles they've received. And when they compare the amount of space they have to the number of people they have, they begin to think, this isn't fair. We didn't get enough land. So their response is to complain. They look at everything that God has given them, all of his generosity, and they respond to his generosity by grumbling and complaining. If Caleb and his daughters and the daughters of Zelophehad are land grant narratives, then what we're about to read is a land grab narrative. It's a fake land grant narrative. It's a negative example. In verse 14, they complain to Joshua about the quantity of the land they're given. They say, "Why have you given us only one allotment and one portion for an inheritance? We are a numerous people, and the Lord has blessed us abundantly." They look at what God has given them, they survey it, and they say, you know what? God's not generous enough. He hasn't given us enough. We want more. And they repeat this complaint in verse 16. They say the hill country is not enough for us. They complain about the quantity of their inherited land. But it's not just the quantity they complain about. They also complain about the quality. It's not just that they want more land, they want different land. Land that doesn't have Canaanites driving around in iron chariots in it. Take a look at the rest of their complaint in the middle of verse 16. "And all the Canaanites who live in the plain have chariots fitted with iron, both those in Bethshan and its settlements, and those in the valley of Jezreel." We want more land and we want different land. We want more quantity and better quality. But Joshua sees right through their complaint, and he addresses both their quantity complaint and their quality complaint in the middle of verse 17. He says, "You are numerous and very powerful. You will have not only one allotment, but the forested hill country as well. Clear it, and its farthest limits will be yours. Though the Canaanites have chariots fitted with iron, and though they are strong, you can drive them out." He addresses their quantity. You are very numerous. And he addresses their quality. You're very powerful. You've got what it takes. You can do this. Take care of it. These chapters, particularly chapters 14 through 17, they reveal to us kind of a block of material in these inheritance chapters. And this block of material in chapters 14 through 17 is bracketed by a land grant narrative and a land grab narrative. And this bracket is meant to reveal to us that when God is generous with us, when he gives us good things, when he gives us good gifts, we can respond in either of these two ways. We can respond like Caleb with courageous commitment, or we can respond like the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh with critical complaining. So as we receive from God, may we be the kind of people that do not respond with critical complaining, but instead respond with courageous commitment.